There's a lot of noise in the crypto sphere and very little signal. We're here to amplify that signal. My name is Nicholas Merton, and you're listening to The AMP, powered by Digivox.
The topic we are talking about today is Bitcoin and energy. Kind of the concern that we're going to be addressing is that Bitcoin mining uses too much energy and is emitting greenhouse gases, which could potentially affect climate change. Many governments and have become kind of concerned about this. So the EU's parliament recently attempted to ban proof of work cryptos, and many US senators like Elizabeth Warren oppose Bitcoin for similar reasons. So the question that we're going to be talking about today is, are these concerns justified? Nick and Eugene are going to discuss it. Then we're going to have a Q&A at the end. So without further ado, Nick, Eugene, take it away.
Thank you so much, Hope. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our Twitter space today. Nick, I guess my first question to you would be, do you think that these arguments against Bitcoin on the basis of their environmental harms have any merit?
I think it's a great question. So I've gone through this internal debate. As you get into crypto space for a couple of years, you start to wonder, is this the right thing? Is this the right sector to support? And you always want to think about all the negative externalities that might come with something like crypto, just like you would getting into investing in stocks or anything else. As I went through my own journey around it, all the while I do find a lot of interest in proof of stake and other consensus mechanisms. I think the core question of whether or not proof of work is good or bad is one that has a lot of nuance behind it. So the first immediate conclusion that most people come to is actually, Hope had hinted to earlier, is that most governments immediately see it as something that's bad, it's wasteful, and doesn't provide any value. I was quite strict when I went on my journey towards trying to answer this question. I didn't buy a lot of the mainstream arguments, some of the ones saying that, there's the traditional banking sector that wastes so much more energy if you consider ATM and the paper printing of new money and all the debit cards and all the the existing banking infrastructure. I think that's a non-argument, because I think that what the banking system offers, whether we like the banks or not, is still much larger and much more day-to-day than what Bitcoin offers. So there's a lot of arguments like that got tossed around, or maybe, for example, the one that it's purely worth the store of value, right? I think, again, those arguments alone aren't enough here towards really critiquing proof of work. And what we need to get down to is a candid analysis on what powers the Bitcoin network. And once we understand what powers it, i.e. specifically whether or not it's really as environmentally destructive as people say or not, then we can start to understand, hey, the value that Bitcoin offers, this store of value, is it worth it? So I wanted to go ahead and do that healthy digestion into it. And I came across three key things that I wanted to talk a little bit about today, and then maybe we can dive into some questions, Eugene, that you were hitting on. The first thing that I think I came across that made me a lot more supportive of proof of work is that a lot of the energy that is going into basically fueling the Bitcoin network and proof of work overall is wasted energy. So I remember one of the few advanced classes I took in high school was AP Environmental Science, probably one of the simpler AP classes in the US, but I found a really interesting passion around energy and understanding how it plays a role in the world. And one of the clear things I realized is that there is a ton of waste from the point of energy extraction, refinement, and basically processing it and delivering it towards the point where it's gas at the gas station for our cars. It's natural gas within our homes to keep us warm during the winter and also to power our cooling devices during the summer. And all this waste that's within the existing infrastructure has really not been tapped into. I think, again, if we were to even take mining out of the equation, this is a multi-$100 billion industry potentially to find ways to basically either reduce or make use of this energy. I.e., there is a huge part of the energy production process, renewable or non-renewable, that is causing a lot of environmental impact with no added benefit. The cool thing is that Bitcoin taps into this. Bitcoin is starting to find a whole range of use cases that it can tap into what was previously wasted energy and make use of it. So one example that I think, Eugene, you hit on perfectly on Twitter, and this, again, really sparked my interest back into the topic, is in the traditional oil transport and refinement process. You've got oil being transported through various pipelines. And the problem is that eventually, not all that basically, whether it be natural gas or oil, basically isn't being utilized, and there's an emission basically in this case of methane, which is much more effective on the environment and a much higher greenhouse gas emitter versus CO2, if we're just talking in pure scientific terms, that would just originally go wasted and wasn't able to be utilized for power consumption in the United States, for example, where they found this use case. And now they were able to, on a localized level, utilize that flare gas in order to power Bitcoin miners. So now you're able to, as I'll talk a little bit later about my third point towards it, is turning electricity into basically in this case money, or it's a battery in this case, if you will, for wealth. I think what's so incredible about that is it's not adding any net emissions. So the only waste you've got at that point is the hardware device, the miners or the ASIC miners that are actually helping to do the computation. The energy consumption, on the other hand, is out of the question. So I think this is really exciting. And we've not just seen this here within flare gas. I know people be like, that's a nuanced argument. Could there be other use cases? And I would say absolutely. Whether you're talking about a non-renewable, like we just talked about there, the flaring of gas. On top of that, there's also renewable energy that just simply isn't able to be used. I give a great example. I think it's somewhere in Siberia. They're utilizing massive hydroelectric plants that basically no longer serve their purpose anymore, likely due to the fact that the community doesn't need that energy. Maybe the community has downsized over time. Huge amounts of electricity that's completely clean and would just be sitting there, not being utilized, can now be utilized for, again, a commercial venture in this case, at no added cost to the environment outside, again, of the production of the miners, which is minor comparative to the energy concern. So this is something that, again, touches into both renewable and non-renewable energy, which, again, I think both energy sources are going to be relevant in the world, no matter if we like proof-of-work mining or not. But they're able to take upon all this wasted energy within the energy sector in order to make Bitcoin mining not only less of a lag on the environment, but also economically more beneficial for Bitcoin miners, because a lot of these energy sources are cheap. They come at one of the lowest rates possible on the market versus using really expensive fossil fuels or using energy that wasn't going to be wasted. You know, I can't tell you all of any mining operation I've read, as I've tried to dig through, that's purposely just trying to burn natural gas or coal or, you know, oil for that matter, you know, all the fossil fuels that can contribute to increasing emissions. Because it just doesn't make economic sense. You'd be paying much higher rates for your energy, which is probably the biggest cost outside of the more predictable hardware cost. So that's point number one there. I think the second thing to consider too is that it is clear through various studies, whether, again, you've got politicians who believe one thing or another, it's clear through the evidence that the majority, and not per se a majority, but at least a growing number, and I think soon to be a majority, of the energy consumption by cryptocurrency miners is going to be renewable. It's not only just something that a lot of miners care about. I think we have to remember they're people too at the end of the day, but it is economically undoubtedly the most cost effective, and there's a big reason for this. The biggest problem with renewables, and I say this as someone who invested in solar stocks back when I started investing in 2011, it was my passion to invest in renewable energy and a lot of trending macro sectors. The biggest problem with renewable energy is the battery issue of storing excess electricity. You have, for example, for solar panels, you have this kind of bell-shaped curve during the day where you've got peak sunlight, peak energy for those photovoltaic cells to be able to convert this potential energy into real energy on the grid. And that's a really big problem that is still yet to be solved for. Same goes for wind. There are different days and times of the day where wind energy is just simply going to be easier to generate than others when it's more windy than not, right? And I've seen this as I've lived in Europe. You can see some wind turbines not really turning, and then you see some days they're purring along and generating a ton of electricity. So understanding this inefficiency, you can see very quickly how crypto could really benefit from this, but also as well, not just benefit from ridiculously low energy costs because there's an excess of supply during the day, but on top of that as well, can start to stabilize the grid as well, setting in a consistent level of demand, in this case, for these renewable technologies. And I think that ironically enough, what people miss is that this is going to bolster further adoption of renewable energy in the economy. It's not just going to be this kind of patchwork. It's going to be a real serious demand setter for renewable energy and is going to encourage investment in the sector. It's going to encourage investment in renewables because now renewable manufacturers and those who are distributing it and installing it on for various grid providers for various jurisdictions, they're going to have a better monetary incentive to actually provide these technologies. It's going to make it more financially feasible. So again, this was big eye opener. And I want to make it very clear for me. When I was looking through this question, I took that very cynical mindset. I'm a big fan of proof of stake. I'm a big fan of a lot of the emerging consensus mechanisms. But proof of work isn't as bad as the rep people give it. It's not as bad as the narrative that people have shared for these reasons. And I think the third final one that I think is really important to share here is that Bitcoin can serve as a battery. It can serve as a way to convert wasted electricity into a form of money. The analogy gets tossed around a bit, and I'm not doing it justice, but I think this idea of being able to take wasted electricity that would otherwise go completely wasted, or even existing energy on the grid right now, and towards a new monetary system, and being able to utilize that in the future, I think is incredibly interesting. I think it's still yet to be fully proven yet. We want to see how Bitcoin will scale long term with mining, but I'm very interested in it long term.
When Nick was talking about the flared gas, what happens is that methane is useful when you are trying to warm up your house and stuff like that. But the issue is that methane is usually produced in places that are far away from cities and electric grids. And so it's just simply not cost effective for you to transport that methane from the place of production to a city. So what happens is they just end up burning it off instead of transporting it, which is the waste. And that's where Bitcoin mining comes in. They take that methane, instead of burning it, they use it to power generators, which then power computers. And that's how it's saved. That's how they save that electricity and how it can be used for Bitcoin mining.
Oh, awesome. Thank you, Eugene. I had some questions. Oh, Nick, are you able to speak?
Can you guys hear me good now?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'm sorry about the connection shit. I don't know what was
You're
going
good.
on.
I think we probably missed a little bit of the last point that you were making. So if you might
No
want to
worries.
reiterate it and then keep going.
No, yeah, actually, to be completely candid, I think Eugene will do a really good job of this. I always have a hard time explaining this point of like Bitcoin being a battery, and I know this is something that Bill Ty and a couple other people have talked a lot about in the crypto space. So Eugene, would you want to maybe explain that a little bit, that concept?
Yeah, sure. It was exactly what you had mentioned before with the supply and demand of renewable energy. What happens is that, people demand the most amount of energy in the evening when they come home from work and they turn on their heating appliances and the oven and all of that. But the supply of renewables like solar and wind is usually during the day, especially with solar. Like there is that bell curve where the most amount of solar energy is produced at like noon, but the most amount desired is in the evening. And it's kind of shocking because if you look at places like Germany, where they introduced solar and wind energy from 2014 to 2015, their emissions actually stayed, the carbon dioxide emissions stayed the same over those 2 years. And the reason for that is because the demand for electricity did not match the supply that renewables had. So they had to turn on their coal and natural gas heating systems anyways, because the wind and solar energy wasn't there for them. So the way that Bitcoin helps fix this is by storing that wind and solar energy as money, and it helps even out the demand curve so that so that there's less energy used in total that is carbon that emits a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. So that way you can produce wind and solar energy, you can store it as Bitcoin, and then you can spend that on oil and natural gas later in the evening, instead of hoping that the wind and solar will be used, but then finding out that it's wasted.
Very cool, Eugene. Yeah, thank you for running through that, man. I think overall, Eugene, did you have any other ones you wanted to go through, like some immediate questions that you wanted to run through?
Yes, I did. One of the arguments that I found against Bitcoin mining is that it does produce emissions, but we've gone through that quite thoroughly. Another argument that I was seeing in one video from The Guardian in particular is this idea of energy scarcity, which is that, even if all Bitcoin mining was powered by green energy, it's still not something that we should allow, because every joule of energy that goes towards Bitcoin mining is a joule of energy that doesn't go towards like heating up food or powering schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think about that argument, and do you think it has any merit?
That's actually a great question, Eugene, because I think on the surface level, like all of us, whether we support crypto or not, like I'll be honest, I'm in that same mindset where I would want to put energy towards real world economic activity. And so it's not to say that Bitcoin isn't important and it's not real, but I would much rather go towards powering a school or powering a business or a factory that's going to create jobs and circulate a lot of economic activity in the real economy. I wholeheartedly would agree with that. I think that the problem that the Guardian is arguing in that case, like a lot of other skeptics of crypto, and it's not probably of any nefarious intention, is that they aren't thinking again about the nuance of it. The question I would ask is, why are the miners able to even get access to that electricity? So, for example, the renewables in this case, right? Shouldn't that be going towards making our factories renewable? Shouldn't it be going towards, helping to make schools more renewable, or homes energy efficient? The problem is that they're not buying it. That's the reality of it. They're not buying that energy. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It could be one, that they either don't want to make an investment in it themselves and actually partake in purchasing it. But more realistically, as I think you hit on very good, Eugene, is that there's a lot of excess energy at times when people just don't need it, And that's the reality, is that, and this is, again, as someone like myself, and not even just so much on like an argument for purely solar and wind. I'm a big proponent of anything that can reduce CO2 emissions and methane. I think that's just a great effort overall to have cleaner air and a better environment. As someone who is a proponent of that, though, we cannot doubt the reality that the battery technology and the inherent inefficiencies of the sun being out during certain peak hours of the day, as well as wind and other services that have basically inconsistent cycles. We need to understand that these inefficiencies exist. Like, we can't ignore that. It doesn't mean that we can't feel good about it, but we need to understand that Bitcoin is not the villain here for making use of that electricity. And I think that that's, again, what so many people get wrong, is that they've never taken that time to really dive through and understanding from engineers in the industry, from scientists, just how much still needs to be done towards building renewable energy that's consistent and can power entire economies. We're still far from it.
Yep. And one really interesting fact that came up in the research was that 8% of all energy produced is lost when it is being transported from the production site to cities and grids. So, Bitcoin mining as a battery is also something that can be used as a way to transport electricity. You can buy more expensive energy near the city if you can then go further out, maybe in the middle of the sea or somewhere, to get electricity from there, as long as it can be turned into Bitcoin right away. So the other thing about Bitcoin mining being a waste of electricity is that in a free market system, we disagree. Like, I, for example, have very short hair, so I would never use a hairdryer. I think hairdryers are a waste. But that doesn't mean that someone else does not have the right to use a hairdryer. The way that a free market system solves this issue is by saying, okay, look, if you value this, then you can buy it. If you don't value it, then don't buy it. And the same goes for Bitcoin mining. The idea that it's a waste is false, because as long as there are certain people who buy Bitcoins or buy Bitcoin mining machines, it is by definition not a waste for them. So I think that argument falls flat as well. It's not like we're distributing electricity to people. It's a free market system. So,
Eugene, I know that if I'm going to get you something for your birthday or Christmas, it won't be a hairdryer. But I was going to say, you brought up a great point, which is that, like, and this is, again, where I think the argument's fair for the Bitcoin supporters, and that is that it's like, why don't we stop gold mining then? Honestly, like, if you really want to talk about, like, and I'm a big commodities bug as well. I love gold and silver, but I mean, to be honest, commodity markets in general, I know that as well from investing in the sector. It's incredibly wasteful. It's incredibly damaging to the environment. And we're not just talking about, we put together some hardware in a factory in China at a company like Bitmain, and we maybe emitted a little bit of emissions. I'm talking about like serious degrees of emissions, destruction of the core surface of the earth and entire ecosystems and environments. And that's, again, like, it's important to admit to those things, just like we do with Bitcoin. But it doesn't mean it should be an excuse for Bitcoin mining to not try to look for better ways. But it's amazing for a market that has only been around, like, realistically, like, we need to really take this in perspective, how fast technology is moving. Bitcoin mining as an industry really only started about 13 years ago when the network came on in around 2008 to 2009. And what's incredible to think is how it went from being run on a couple GPUs, like an NVIDIA graphics card on your computer, or even your CPU back in the day when it was so easy to mine, to now having specified miners that are running in hyper efficient structures. It is no longer a game where you can be wasteful or you can just, I'm going to flip on some miners and make some money real quick. It's incredibly energy efficient. And the beauty is that it's now paired with energy, like economic efficiency. And what we find is that the most economic efficient is the most environmental. It's either wasted energy that can't be utilized, as you mentioned, Eugene, about like energy that's at a far distance that would just lose its energy efficiency during transportation, but most importantly, renewable energy. And that is incredibly exciting. And one thing I always want to emphasize as well is that for this renewable energy, what really makes it quite lucrative here, and again, you also don't want it to come back and bite Bitcoin in the butt, with some of the cycles. But if you're not using a very, very high degree of renewable energy, and you can still guarantee a minimum level of consistent energy output, the really cool thing about that is that's actually great for miners, because for miners need to be constantly running for the most part. They can be shut off from time to time, if done on a less frequent basis, but they really actually need consistent energy input, and it's best not to turn them off. So that's a really important thing here as well, is that by tapping into various energy resources, it's just going to add more to the capacity for mining.
Awesome. Do you have any other questions, Eugene?
Nope, I think that was it for my end.
All right, awesome. So now if anybody would like, we will kind of move into a time of Q&A. Thank you again, Nick and Eugene, for that awesome conversation. Super cool to listen to you guys go back and forth. So in order to request the mic, in the bottom left-hand corner, there should be a request the mic button. You can tap that, and then I will see that you've requested the mic, and I will give you permission to speak. Once I call your name, feel free to state your question, ask it in quick, easy format, and then mute yourself, and we will answer the question, and we'll go on to the next person. So while we're waiting for people to request the mic, if that ends up happening, I have some super basic, kind of beginner questions, if you guys wouldn't mind. So for those people who don't know, what are proof of work cryptos, and why are they more concerning to people on this issue than like normal crypto?
Yeah, so I can dive into that. So basically, when it comes to proof of work, let's, I guess, first kind of understand, as you mentioned, Hope, I think that's a great point. Like, first off, like, what is proof of work and what is crypto mining, essentially? So proof of work is kind of what it says within the title. It's a proof that you've done some effective work, computational work for that matter. And to put it really simple, you've probably heard about like the concept of how Bitcoins are made. They're made by people doing some kind of equations on their computer, and therefore giving them the right to mint new Bitcoin. And that's a little bit of a dramatically simplified version of it. But really what you're utilizing here with the Bitcoin network, and this is where the term blockchain comes in. With each block on the Bitcoin blockchain, each of these blocks is a metaphor for data that's being basically validated on chain. And that's why, again, you have the chain here. It's a ledger over time on the network where we're adding more and more data or more transactions. And we need to have a way to make sure we know that the information that's being validated is truthful, that there was a high degree of trust and to what's being added on that chain. So the way that a Bitcoin block is created is that you have thousands upon thousands of these Bitcoin miners, or people who are effectively trying to have the right to create that next block, taking in existing transactions on the network that people are requesting. Bob wants to send 1 Bitcoin to Alice, etc. And once they're compiling that in, they have basically this data here effective within the block, and they want to get it validated on the network. And they have to basically find what's known as a hash. Think of it as a long string of numbers and letters to basically validate that they have done this proof of work. They put an economic cost into validating these transactions, and have an economic cost in having authority in the network, right? They've put an economic cost in the Bitcoin network. So that's a very kind of quick way to understand the steps as to why proof of work is so secure, is because of the economic cost that's going into it and how difficult it is to get this hash. And that's why there's thousands of miners across the world who effectively every about 10 minutes will get that hash, that proof of work effectively, that allows them to share with the network, hey, I've got the proof. It is cryptographically verifiable. There is no need for you to know who I am, where I am, how I got this answer. I proved it through work. And then once the network hears that, respectively, it gives them the ability to mine a block reward. So they basically are able to mine or mint new Bitcoin for that block. And every 4 years, that amount drops in half. So that's the really detailed view of proof of work. And the problem about it that most people see is that in order to do this and have this consensus and this really high degree of security, and people undoubtedly, whether they like it or not, can't deny that Bitcoin is the most secure decentralized network on the planet, hands down. And same with Ethereum as a second network with its proof of work. People will say, on the other hand, that this is purely wasteful, that we don't need to be doing this because of the energy consumption, the hardware, or ASIC miners, as they're referred to as, this specific computer hardware and the energy input aren't really technically needed in order to have a very high degree of trustless security and validity of transactions. And people will usually point towards the alternative, which is POS, or proof of stake. And this is where the stakeholders of the network who have coins, so in the case of Ethereum, which is moving from proof of work to proof of stake, this would mean that the holders on the Ethereum network basically would get to confirm transactions. And the way that would work for Ethereum, as it's the second largest, is that they're going, you need a minimum of 32 Ethereum to run a node effectively. So it shows you have a big economic weight in the network. And due to your percentage amount of Ethereum being held on the network under your node, the more nodes you have operating, the more likelihood you have a chance to be picked as the next random validator who gets to validate what transactions happen on the network. So again, like proof of work, batching in those transactions that are waiting to be confirmed or validated, and basically validating them on the network if you're so choosing to do so. And proof of stake outside of Ethereum has been worked on and used by a lot of protocols. And to be completely honest, to all those who might be critical of proof of stake, with little to no issues, proof of stake has been working quite smoothly. But if you were to talk about, I think, a system, all the while, albeit it might have some more negative externalities than proof of stake, which is very green effectively, and that's the argument most people make against proof of work, is that why don't we just use proof of stake? Proof of work still has a higher degree of security by most security experts. If you were to talk to people in the crypto sector, again, those who are big on peer-to-peer networks and the architecture to maintain decentralization, most of them will argue, for better or for worse, proof of work is still a little bit more secure. So it's something up for debate. People have differing opinions on it, but as much as I like proof of stake, I don't think we're going to we shouldn't force the Bitcoin network to merge to proof of stake through regulation and by force. I think it'll be very clear once Ethereum makes the merge to proof of stake that, hey, maybe this is the future. Maybe this isn't something that we can ignore. And Bitcoin, just like any decentralized network, is going to have to compete. It's going to have to do its best to maintain its spot as number one. And that's not always guaranteed. So maybe the bet on proof of work is going to be worth it. Maybe not. We're going to have to see through time. And that's why I think that both systems equally can coexist.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was going to ask, as a follow-up question, do you think that proof of stake will ever overtake proof of work? But you kind of answered that question.
Yeah.
So Just as a reminder, if you want to request the mic, feel free. I'm going to ask Nick probably one more question. If we don't get any questions requested by the end of that, then we'll just probably wrap it up and call it good. This is a super basic question, but like going out, and Eugene, you can answer this question as well, like talking to people, like everyday people who maybe like your mom or your grandma or like somebody who like doesn't really understand the world of crypto, but maybe they understand like the world of energy and CO2 gas emissions and whatnot. They understand kind of that side of it because that's been around a while, but they don't really understand the crypto aspect of it. How would you explain all this to them? And do you think you could use this argument as a way to get somebody to start investing in crypto? Or do you think it's just more of something that is an educational thing? It's not really a winning point, quote unquote, to get people to start investing.
I will go first. One thing that I've noticed, just speaking with people in Calgary, which is the city that I live in, is that many people stay away from Bitcoin because they fear that buying it or using it will contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. But when I tell them about all of the different ways that Bitcoin actually helps the energy grid, uses wasted energy, acts as a battery, their eyes open up as if they've never heard it before. So I think one big issue that Bitcoin has is that there's simply not enough, there's a lack of education around how it can be used for good in terms of climate change, the environment, stabilizing our electricity grid. The second thing that I would say about Bitcoin and this whole cryptocurrency system is that it is much more reliable than centralized banking systems. And I think that we in the West, we take our banking systems for granted because we haven't really had hyperinflation in living memory. We haven't had wars in like 50, 70 years. We haven't had centralized censorship of political opponents. Maybe Canada's starting to move there, but I'm a bit biased. The whole point here, though, is that we have come to trust and rely on our banking system, whereas in other countries like Argentina, and we'll stick with Argentina for now, they do have inflation that's really, really high. And so when it comes to saving your money that you have worked all your life for, if you have a choice between putting that into the Argentinian peso or into Bitcoin to save that, then you're going to choose Bitcoin, even if that means that the environment is not going to take like first fiddle. That's because you care more about like the next year of your life than you do 50, 100 years down the line. Many Ukrainians are going through this right now, where if you don't, if you're going to be killed by a missile, you don't really care about the environment that much. And you look at studies as well of developing nations. Once people in those countries have enough to eat and to drink, they do start to care about the environment and more long-term impacts of their way of life. So I think the best way to get someone on board onto Bitcoin specifically is to let them know about how it can help the energy grid, how it can help combat climate change, as well as how lucky we are to live in a place where our banking systems are generally neutral and reliable.
Awesome, thank you. Nick, did you have anything to add to that or final thoughts?
I think Eugene brought up a really good point. I wanted to build on it a bit more. Is and again, I think it's the core argument that he was trying to make, which is when do we kind of draw the line, And I think it's ironic we kind of set a double standard for crypto, where we expect crypto to just be absolutely perfect for some reason. Crypto can have no negative externalities, and if it does, then I'm not going to invest in it. And exactly as Eugene pointed out, we already consume a lot of electricity for our home, right? Because housing is important. It's a basic necessity. I would say the same goes for manufacturing of our clothes, of our electronics, so we can communicate and transport and interact with one another. There's tons of negative externalities. Your neighbor, you can switch to an electric vehicle today and know that your emissions are cut down, but all your neighbors can still drive gas-powered cars or do whatever, and it still is going to cause an effect on your life. Basically the tragedy, the comedy, the tragedy of the commons is the term I'm thinking of. But so anyways, my point is that there are a lot of things in the world right now that are consuming electricity, causing waste, causing inefficiencies in the world, and even causing death or suffering in the world that we turn a blind eye to. And I think that if you really, once you dive into Bitcoin and understand the costs of Bitcoin and how they're actually a lot lower than most people say, and then you start to realize the benefit of it, it becomes absolutely clear that proof of work is not some major enemy. I mean, if you understand how much lost efficiency economically is caused by currency devaluation, totalitarian regimes just taking people's wealth at face value, not having just clear stability and access to open and free financial services, whether that's Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies and DeFi services, all of the stuff that proof of work is going into to secure makes it totally worth it. It's totally worth it. And again, that for me is just why I don't attack proof of work. Maybe you can make the argument that proof of stake could replace it. Sure. I think that that's a fair argument to have or a fair debate, but there's no reason to attack proof of work in cryptocurrencies because the value that they have provided in just a couple of years, a little over a decade, has been immeasurable, and it's going to continue to get bigger and bigger. And I would say, again, like the argument that people bring up to kind of maybe close this off is that people, say, for example, that Bitcoin's wasteful. But if you understand the energy profile of the banking sector, the place that's storing your life savings or the money that you spend to buy groceries and everything, I'm assuming, even if we knew about the energy consumption of it or if we want it to be renewable, we wouldn't say shut down the banking system tomorrow, right? Even I wouldn't say that as a crypto supporter. So it's, again, once you understand the nuance of it, it becomes a lot more clear.
Definitely. I did say while you guys were talking, there was the final chance to raise your hand and ask a question, and we did get somebody raise their hand, so we have about 20 minutes. So I'll entertain a question, and if you guys have more questions, feel free to request the mic. Otherwise, if we hit the 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time mark, then we're going to be calling it good. So May Ank, if I pronounced that correctly, has requested the mic, and you may now ask your question. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning, folks. Nicholas, Eugene, and DigiFox, thank you for having this event. Super amazing content. Just had a question and possibly just a comment as well. The main thing being, I noticed everyone's just kind of focusing on the amount of energy crypto is, consuming or not consuming. But I think it's a great point that you brought up, Eugene, about the fiat currency and, just our centralized banking system and how much energy that consumes. And just on my initial research, I was looking at like an average $10 bill or even a $5 bill. Their lifespan is about 5.5 years or so, and 4.5 years respectively. And just to produce these bills in our, traditional fiat currency, the amount of resources that it uses, and it's almost double of what, people call crypto out to be using currently. So I was curious, like Nicholas or Eugene, would you happen to have any resources that you could point me to, or all the folks here, in terms of like where is a good resource to kind of understand the energy consumption for Bitcoin as opposed to our traditional Federal Reserve quote unquote currency system. But yeah, that's kind of my run-on question and comment. Thank you.
That's actually a great question, man. So I think right off the top of my head, I can't think of a resource. There was some really good infographics that were based off some of the major studies completed. In the meantime, what I can try to do is maybe I can find it online here during the conversation. But yeah, I think exactly what you mentioned. I saw like the very large macro overview of like gold mining, the existing banking sector, some of these other types of systems that exist in our day-to-day lives. Some of them close to scale with what crypto has offered in the sense of value, some of them much bigger. Where I think there's a little bit more leeway. But as you mentioned, the banking sector as a whole, if you're considering ATM networks, you're considering the banking branches themselves, the money printing tied to the central bank system, as well as all the infrastructure systems. I actually knew someone who worked on the IT infrastructure at the Federal Reserve for the past decade. And it's incredible how much architecture goes in to the entire banking system that we just don't see or don't think about, because all we see is the consumer facing side, through your debit card or some cash in your wallet and a friendly face at the bank. But there's a lot that goes into that, and I don't think it's wasted, but again, I think it is exactly as you mentioned. When you start to look at it that scale, you realize, oh wow, Bitcoin's not really the enemy. So on that question, Mac, I'll actually try to see if I can get the resource real quick, and maybe I can reference it real quick here on the Twitter space.
And while Nick is looking for that, I'll give my quick answer. I'm reading through a book called The Bitcoin Standard by Saifedean Amadeus. I'm sure I'm butchering his name, but in it he goes through all of the different forms of money that there have been in the past and why they worked or they didn't work. One point that he makes is that the reason for why gold and also why Bitcoin will work really well and have worked really well is because they take a lot of effort to produce, and effort as in money. So part of expending a lot of energy or money in creating new currency is that you actually retain its value much better that way. So that's something to keep in mind when you are thinking about something like a fiat standard, which doesn't really take as much effort. It just takes a couple of keystrokes to increase the number of dollars in the system. But something like Bitcoin or something like gold, you need to expend a lot of energy and money in order to get more of it. So that's something to keep in mind for if you want to look into it. It's called the Bitcoin Standard.
Awesome. Thank you, Eugene and Nicholas. Excellent. That's an excellent point, actually, the effort that was required. I think that will resonate with a lot of folks that I've been having an uphill challenge in trying to, not so much convince, but just trying to illuminate the relevancy of cryptocurrency, not just Bitcoin, because it gets into what's a good use for a transactionary use? There's so many distractions, but I think that's a great point, the effort that you mentioned in the technology. So thank you both. Appreciate that.
Absolutely, Meg. Yeah. I wanted to actually say I just found the article. I sent it over to you, Eugene, real quick. I don't know if there's a way. I guess in Twitter Spaces we can't share links, but if you want to DM that over to him and stuff, that might be of value and stuff. But there was a really good, pretty much comprehensive report from BitcoinMagazine.com where they went through this. Again, I know perhaps a bit biased in this case, but I think the data kind of speaks for itself when you start to get a scale of the Bitcoin industry versus even basic forms of transportation, aviation, shipping, passenger road vehicles. It just really starts to dwarf Bitcoin as an energy consumer. And once you start to realize, again, I think on that point, man, that you emphasized, the renewable capacity as well, making up a lot of that energy consumption, it just drops it even lower. If we're really talking about the kind of wasteful, or more specifically the non-renewable energy, CO2 emitting or methane emitting forms of energy. So definitely, I think that's one of the best reports I had read and stuff when I was going through it, and I just rediscovered it here online.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much for asking your question. And thank you so much for everybody for joining the Twitter space. Thank you, Nick and Eugene, for the awesome conversation and for the Q&A. We're going to call it off here and end the Twitter space. So I believe that this will be available to listen to, correct me if I'm wrong, Eugene, that it's going to be available on our podcast later, which is available on Spotify and pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. Also, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow us on TikTok and Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We have all those social medias, so feel free to follow us there. We try to post every month or so to our blog, so we also post some cool content there. Maybe we'll write an article about this topic. We just posted one, in case you haven't heard about the metaverse, which we just posted today to our blog. And then also, if you have any questions that you didn't get to ask or didn't feel comfortable asking in a verbal setting and you wanted to ask it, you can always DM Eugene on Twitter. like our Twitter page. Don't DM like Eugene's personal Twitter. DM Digifox, and Eugene runs that, so he'll see that. Or you can message us in Intercom, which you can find on our website, digifox.finance, or in app. If you go to the profile tab, you can contact us there and leave us a message as well. Also, if you're having any issues with the app or you have some questions about Digifox or Get Paid in Crypto specifically, you can also feel free to contact us through the Intercom or our in-app chat support system. There we go. And we'll be happy to help you out there as well. But yeah, thank you guys so much for being here, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day. We'll see you in the next event.
Take care, guys.